Hi, I'm Chantal Johnson and welcome to part 3 of our Redwork inspired sampler featuring Ann Butler's Inks by Colorbox and her background faux quilting stamps. The first week we talked about how to make the grid. The second week, or the second part of our video, we talked about this wonderful chain stitch. And today we're going to focus on the applique as well as the blanket stitch. Let me show you what you're going to need to get started. So obviously you're going to have your grid or your base fabric. You've done your chain stitch along your solid lines, and now we're going to create the applique. And all I did here was I took a little bit heavier fabric, a little heavier muslin, and I actually die cut my shape with one of my die cut machines, and then I stamped with the faux quilting background stamps onto the onto the shape that I cut. If you're beginning the blanket stitch and you're new to this stitch, it's better to do a larger more simple shape than something that's a lot of intricacies with curves and corners and things like that. What I want to do is show you how to do the stitch on a solid line, and then we'll move to the sampler. Just before we get started, I do want to share with you a book that I find to be a great source for embroidery stitches. It's put out by Inspiration Magazine. This copy is actually from 1997, but I believe they still have it in print. And it's called A to Z of Embroidery Stitches, and the photographs and the descriptions, the details and the directions are wonderful. And this is just one of the pages on the blanket stitch, and there's several varieties in here, and you can really follow along well. We are just going to do the simple blanket stitch. And so what you're going to do is you have your straight line or your applique, and you've brought your thread from the back to the front. And now you're going to go just a little bit beside, and then you're going to come back down, and you're going to catch the fabric underneath. So that's our first stitch. And now what we're going to do is we're going to come back the same height, and you want to try to get to the same distance. And again, I'm going to go on my line. My thread is going to go under, and I'm making the blanket stitch as we go along. If you want to, in your practice sampler, you could always take a pencil and do tiny little marks every so often to give you the right height going across and the distance, the width. It does take a little bit of practice, so I encourage you that anytime you're working on an embroidery sampler or an embroidery piece, to have a little scrap cloth made of the same base fabric that you're using, and take a few practice stitches and then move to your sampler. That way you're going to have a little bit of readiness, and you're going to have the tension the way you'd like it. And remember, if you don't like a stitch in your embroidery sampler, simply take it out. Now let me show you on the applique. Okay, I've taken a few stitches already. The heart is my applique, and I did 2 different sizes on the sampler. And the edge of your applique will be your guide. So I'm going to pick it up just a little bit. It helps if you want to lay your thread across. I'm going to turn it just a little towards me. And then I can use the guide, the very edge of my applique. And I'm going to pull, not incredibly tight, but to get it the same tension. And then I'm just going to keep moving down the heart, holding this thread across the base of whatever shape I've got, going in, and you want to do it in one stitch, not in and out, and then pull, and you can hold your thread in place, give it a little pull, and there you've got your blanket stitch. This is the finished sampler. I actually turned mine into a pillow using some coordinating fabric, and I even made little appliques here in the center, but I didn't actually stitch those. You could if you wanted to. On this quilt square, I went ahead and did a running stitch around, and over here a little bit less. I added some lace and buttons. These are mother of pearl buttons. You could add anything that you would like. You could add ribbons, you could add charms. I added a little bit of lace for the bows, and let me show you the finished back. The back is a pillow back, and then I went ahead and added the pearl buttons. Really, after you've done the embroidery part, it's really up to you what you'd like to do with the sampler. If you choose to frame your sampler, you don't need to put glass onto the embroidery, as it can just stay without the glass. And you'd want to make sure that all of your threads on the back are trimmed very close, that you've pressed this and there's not any loose threads underneath. I hope you've enjoyed our stitching sampler, and I hope to see if you'll post on Ann Butler's blog some of the pictures of your samplers. Thank you so much for joining me.